Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
And moving on, as promised in the Union Budget, the Cabinet has approved a 1,000 crore rupee venture capital fund to support India's Spacetech startups. Managed by the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorisation Centre, the fund aims to drive innovation in satellite technology, launch vehicles and space applications. The fund will invest between 10 crores and 60 crore rupees in startups, depending on their growth stage and potential impact to India's space capabilities. It is expected to support around 40 startups over the next 5 years. Joining us now to discuss this further is Anirudh Sharma, the co-founder and CEO of Digantara, as well as my colleague Ritu. Thank you so much, Anirudh, for joining us here on Startup Street. You know, this comes as a big boost for India's space tech sector, right? With the Cabinet approving this 1,000 crore rupee fund in line with what was announced in the budget. If you could tell us what this means for the sector at large.
No, I think the government has shown a strong signal to the industry and even the venture capital ecosystem that the government is backing such an innovation and indigenous innovation. And this was much of a need of an hour for the space industry, looking at how capital intensive the sector is. So I think it is a very good move. But what needs to change and what needs to increase is the budget that they've allocated for the space sector, because 1,000 crores, when you look at a 5-year horizon, it's not that much. So I think the sector would need much more, but I would say this is a good start.
All right, 1,000 crores is a good start, but not enough. But you know, in terms of funding, Indian space tech startups have seen a huge surge in the last 3 years. But what is missing is risk capital, because the bulk of the funding is still going to early stage startups, not so much to growth stage ventures. You know, how big of an issue does this remain, and what do you hope from this 1,000 crore rupee fund the focus should be?
No, I think this is not an issue, so to say, at this point in time, because the space industry in India just started a couple of years ago. And all the space tech industries or companies in India need some time to develop the technologies, and R&D takes time. There is a huge gestation period for that before we start commercializing our solutions. And that's why I think we're seeing too much of a capital infusion in early stage ventures. But looking at the fund, I would say that the growth stage capital is something that is very important to have sustained effort in the growth of the economy within India, for which this fund is perfectly placed. But like I said, we need much more than this fund for us to be able to sustain and compete with the global markets.
A lot more money than just, or a lot more than just this fund to compete with the global markets. But, you know, Anirudh, you started Digantara when, if I'm not wrong, when you were 19. So, you know, how has your experience been when you launched it in 2020? In addition to funding, what kind of help from both, like, you know, the policy perspective, as well as at the idea level, do you think, or do you feel that you needed at that point to sort of scale faster?
So the things were very different back then, right? So we didn't have in space, so to say, to support startups both on policy, regulatory, and the investments and promotion side of things. So today we have a clear structure. So if we had this in the past, so I think the pace at which we would have grown could have been increased. The second thing is on the infrastructure side, the access to infrastructure talent that we have today, that's just because of the growth again, was not there back then. So it was all something that we had to brute force and figure out, which we don't have to do today for someone starting out right now. So you have many more schemes available from the government. And also there is a policy house which is focusing on developing a clear, transparent policy framework for the space startups to grow. So I think from 2020 to 2024, a lot of things have changed, and we've seen multifold growth within the Indian space ecosystem. We have seen more than 100 companies emerge out of India, doing everything from launch to launching satellites to applications.
Well, Anirudh, a lot indeed has changed, but what about the challenges? You know, whether that is skilling, innovation, apart from funding, what do you think are some of the key priorities that need to be solved for?
So one of the things that has to change is government to be the key customer for the innovation that we're building here in India. When you look at the markets like Europe and the US, most of what has happened today in the space ecosystem, and both of these ecosystems are mainly because of the government support. Government has several schemes to support innovation from TRL0, which is like when you just have an idea and you have to develop that into a prototype, because to develop a prototype itself takes a lot of fun. That comes with the fact that not just funding from venture capital or equity funding, you need R&D based funding that the government would invest into building technologies, because you cannot expect a TRL9 product without having research funding. So that is one thing that I would say, which is much needed for India to grow and support the Indian government with all the innovations that we're building in multiple companies for supporting the defense ecosystem. The second thing on the skilling side, so I think, like I said, things have changed. That's mainly because of the opportunities that India has created in the last 4 years, and things will evolve. But what we need to do is we need to have powerhouses like, you have ISRO and you have IIST, which is supporting startups like us in getting talent. But I think what has to change is we need to have many more institutes focusing on research, where we can work with academia and bridge this gap and get talented people to work with us on developing the innovation in India.
All right, Anirudh, we're completely out of time, but thank you so much for joining us and outlining what exactly the space tech sector needs at this point to, sort of compete globally.
Thank you so much for having me.